When gamers talk about reducing input lag, then these discussions mainly focus on the refresh rate of the monitor, the frame rate the game is running at, and the polling rate as well as DPI setting of the mouse. But while these are very important factors for how responsive a game feels, I think that the keyboard is equally important, because we not only use it to move our character through the game world, to open and close doors, get in and out of vehicles, peek around corners and quickly dive behind cover, we also use our keyboard to trigger abilities where timing is critical, like Genji's Deflect or Zarya's Shield Bubble, where too much input lag can easily get you killed, which is why I believe that the keyboard is much more important when it comes to achieving a responsive gaming experience than many players give it credit for. Recently we've seen a push for 8 kHz polling rates on gaming mice, which I've done a video on recently. But today's video is about keyboards and the two test samples I got from EVGA, which support polling rates of 4 kHz or 4000 Hz. That is the Z15, which uses mechanical key switches, and the Z20, which uses optical switches. But first, what can we expect from a polling rate of 4000 Hz? With a polling rate of 125 Hz, there are 8 milliseconds between updates. So when you press a key right after an update happened, then that information must wait up to 8 milliseconds until it gets sent to your PC. At 500 Hz, the time between updates is 2 milliseconds. At 1000 Hz, it is 1 millisecond, and at 4000 Hz, it's 0.25 milliseconds. This means that by going from 1 kHz to 4 kHz, the time between updates is reduced by 0.75 milliseconds. Now, to measure how the latency or responsiveness of your system is affected by the keyboard, I came up with two tests where I take use of NVIDIA's system latency measuring device called LDAT. With the first test, I want to find out how much of an impact the 4 kHz polling rate has on system latency compared to a polling rate of 1000 Hz. This means that I do not want the key switch to be a factor here. That is quite easy to achieve with mechanical keyboards, as I just have to connect the two LDAT wires to the contacts of the switch on the PCB of the keyboard. I can then just launch LDAT in autofire mode, where it will short the contact on the PCB, which then triggers the input, and LDAT measures the time it takes from shorting the wires to the monitor turning white. So again, with this test, it does not matter what kind of key switch is used, as I short the contacts directly on the PCB. This test is sadly not possible with keyboards that use optical switches, at least not with the ones that I have here, as there are no contacts exposed that I could physically connect a wire to. Now let us take a look at the results of this test, where I had the sole application run at 4000 frames per second, with the monitor set to a refresh rate of 360 Hz. At a polling rate of 1000 Hz, I measured an average delay of 8.81 milliseconds with the Z15. When I increased the polling rate to 4000 Hz, the longest, shortest and average delays, as well as the standard deviation, which tells us how spread out or stable the measured delays are, were slightly reduced. Remember that going from a polling rate of 1 kHz to 4 kHz reduces the time between updates by just 0.75 milliseconds. So on average, we can expect a delay reduction of about 0.37 milliseconds, which is what the results show. Now, you might have read online that keyboards which use a PS2/2 connector are much faster than USB keyboards. So I decided to include the Jerry G803000 in this test, just to show you that this statement isn't quite true. Especially when we compare it to the Corsair K70 Rapidfire, which is just ridiculously fast. So as I said, in this test the key switches are not a factor, as I short the contact directly on the PCB of the keyboard. But when you want to buy a new keyboard, then you do want to know the true end-to-end delay that you get, and that means that we must include the delay of the key switch. So to measure that, I had to build a machine which allows me to measure the delay from the point where the key gets pressed to the action triggered by that input showing up on the monitor. That machine must also be able to repeatedly press the key with the exact same force, as any variation would make the results useless. So I built this keyboard torture machine. Here we have a linear solenoid which I can position to press pretty much any key on the keyboard. There's a contact on the tip of the pusher which is connected to one of the LDAT wires, and a second contact sits directly on the keycap which is connected to the other LDAT wire. When I then switch on the linear solenoid, the contact on the pusher hits the contact on the keycap, which tells LDAT that it must start counting until the action triggered by that input is detected by the LDAT sensor, which sits on the monitor. This means that with this test I measure the entire end-to-end delay, including the delay of the switch, which is the data that you are interested in when you are shopping for a new keyboard. I also plan to do a video in the future where I test the impact that different key switches have on the input lag of a keyboard that allows me to swap them out. So stay tuned for that. Now let's take a look at the results I measured in a somewhat realistic scenario with CSGO running at 500 frames per second, at 128 ticks, and the monitor's refresh rate set to 360 Hz. As expected, the measured delays are higher in this test because CSGO ran at 500 FPS, while Sol ran at 4000 FPS. Also, let's not forget that the game engine has a bit more work to do than just changing the color from black to white. And we also measure the actuation and debounce delay of the switch now, so that is another factor to consider. Going from 1 kHz to 4 kHz has a smaller impact now than it had in the previous test where I used the Sol app. The Z20, which uses optical switches, has about 4 milliseconds less delay on average than the Z15, which uses mechanical switches. The difference between 1 kHz and 4 kHz is about the same as with the Z15. Then with the Cherry G83000, which uses a PS/2 connector, and Cherry MX Brown switches, the measured average delay is quite long with 25.08 milliseconds. This makes me want to test all available Cherry MX switches as soon as possible to find out how much of an impact the switch itself has on the delays. Then I also tested the ASUS TUF Gaming K7, which uses optical switches that at least look very similar to the ones inside the Z20. However, with the K7 I measured delays that were worse than the ones of the Z20. The Corsair K70 with its mechanical Cherry MX speed switches again takes the crown as it is the fastest keyboard in my tests, despite running at a polling rate of just 1 kHz. So considering that I bought this keyboard 3 years ago, Corsair has obviously done a great job on both the hardware and the firmware. Which also shows us that there's more to the input lag of a keyboard than the type of the switch it uses and the polling rate it supports. But as we all know, when you buy a new mouse or keyboard, then it's not just about the input lag. Ergonomic design, the feel of the key switches, as well as additional features like hotkeys and other controls are very important when it comes to which keyboard you want to buy. If you already decided to buy either the EVGA Z15 or the Z20, then just based on how they affect system latency, I would suggest to buy the Z20. But regardless of which keyboard you want to buy, I recommend to always get some hands-on time with the keyboard before you buy it to make sure that you like the feel of the key switches. Or if you shop online, then make sure that you can easily return the keyboard if you don't like it. And that's pretty much it for today. Let me know what you think about my new test methods and stay tuned for more mouse and keyboard tests in the future. I hope that I can provide that keyboard switch comparison really soon. As always, I want to thank my fine patrons for their awesome support, which allows me to come up with new test methods and produce content that, as far as I'm aware of, you won't find anywhere else on YouTube. If you enjoyed this video, then please give it a like, subscribe for more, ring the bell to get notified when I upload my next video, and I hope to see you next time. Until then, have a nice day and take care. My name is Chris, and this was Battle Nonsense.